Welcome everyone to Silver Cloud's first and hopefully one of many webinars. So we're really excited to have Peter Griffiths from Callimere Point join us today to talk through the topic of how to achieve business-wide transformation through HR digitisation, which certainly seems to be a hot topic at the moment. So just a bit of information before we start. So we are recording this webinar. We'll send around a copy after the session along with a copy of the slides. So don't worry about having to take detailed notes. We will send all the information round to you. If anyone has any questions as we go, do feel free to type them into the chat box and I'll collate them as we go, and hopefully we'll have time in the Q&A section at the end to answer all of them. If we don't, Peter and I will certainly answer them afterwards and make sure we send around a copy of all the question and answers with the slides. So first, if we just start off with some introductions. So my name is Helen Armstrong. I'm CEO of Silver Cloud HR. So we're an independent HR consultancy specialising in HR digitisation, and more specifically helping companies select and implement HR technology and systems, and sometimes process actually, to help them automate and streamline their ways of working and become more efficient. So obviously data plays a large part in that process. So Peter, would you like to introduce yourself and how you fit into this?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Peter Griffiths. I'm a director at Callimere Point Risk Advisory. I head up our HR analytics practice, which is a relatively newly established part of our business. Traditionally, we come from more of the financial services world, where we've been exercising HR analytics skills and techniques for clients to deliver real value to them. And it all started really because a number of our clients in financial services were pointing to HR data as being a key part of their, view of their overall organisation. And so, we determined this was obviously an area where, there was potential to grow and deliver real value to businesses. And so we have established the practice and have, been dealing with clients for the last couple of years rather successfully.
Thank you. And thanks for joining us today. So we're going to start off with a quick poll. If I just share that on the screen now. So this is a multiple choice question, of which I'll give you a clue there's more than one correct answer. So the question is, please tick which of the below statements you would say are true of digitising HR. So it uses data and analytic tools to identify insights on people, provides all the technical capability your HR team will need, enables powerful predictive business modelling, involves a high level of investment, and is a gradual process with quick wins along the way. So I'll give you all a moment to answer those. So which are true of digitising HR? So I don't know what you're expecting to see there, Peter. I know certainly from my experience, a lot of my conversations with HR directors seem to start with what is digitisation. Often they get asked by a CIO or a CEO to digitise their HR departments, but they're not always sure what that entirely means. Do you have the same experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think really, people's expectations of the use of HR analytics vary across organisations. I think, if I look at the statements there are not, I think three of them really where I would fully agree with them. Exercising the use of sort of data and analytic tools is obviously key to people's delivery. I think for the more advanced user, the ability to do predictive analytics is huge. That's where I think this is all heading in that direction. But accepting that really this is not just something that can happen overnight. This is part of a long drawn out journey and really is an organizational development thing that needs to be considered, alongside, other pieces of digitization across the organization.
Yeah, sure. Let's just see if we can get the results up. Okay, so can you all see that?
Yeah, so I think thankfully most of the results of the poll seem to have acknowledged the same elements, which is encouraging. I think that's a very those messages are definitely the ones that we're hearing as we speak to clients across the HR analytics space. So that's consistent.
Good. And we'll hear more about this over the next hour, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if we go back to the presentation. Okay, over to you, Peter.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one of the obvious questions that we're really trying to define here is what is the digital transformation in business? And really, it's twofold. Really, there are elements that involve the sort of automation and removal of data-driven process or enhancement of data-driven process. That's where we see clients who still have very manual processes, copying data from Excel spreadsheets into other systems, and other approaches like that, text-based documentation and things that really create a lot of overhead for the business as a whole, and looking to try and use data analytics to support the automation of those processes. Those really then allow resource that is consumed in manual process to be allocated to actually delivering insight and value to the business. So that's one element of it. In addition to that is obviously the use of data to give insights on people and to support, I guess, the more broad decision making across the organization. The siloing of data is extremely dangerous for organizations. People aren't really extracting the value they could do from leveraging data across their organization. And HR plays a key role in that, right? HR contains some of the most valuable data within an organization. So the ability to extract that, normalize, clean, associate that data with bits of data from across the organization is extremely powerful. So this is one of the big benefits that digital transformation is having on businesses, is that ability to utilize data more effectively. And the last point on this slide is really that data analytics uses very granular data. So the more information you can feed into data analytics, technologies, for example, the greater the insight value is, right? If you've got a much more, the more information you can give it, the more patterns are available, the more predictive analytics that can be executed on that data set. So, all of these points lead us to, really stepping forward in the business transformation driven by digital. Does any questions at that point? Okay, so the question obviously for this session is where does really HR fit within that digital transformation of the organization? I hope I'm not sort of putting anyone's nose out of joint when I say that, in many respects, HR data has been largely sort of limited in its scope of usage across, across business lines in the organizations that we tend to deal with. The challenges are always there, right? The data is either highly disjointed in terms of it's in multiple systems and not really connected to each other. The quality is not always great, and therefore there's the initial problem set where even HR managers with the real skill and understanding to utilize data simply don't have the availability of that data. They aren't able to pull it up, at the tip of their fingertips to allow them to then, have meaningful conversations with the business. So, there is blame that limitation. Now, I think what is beginning to happen, and we're seeing it, I know it's a trend that we've discussed as well, Helen, is we're seeing a lot more of the organizations out there trying to structure their data more effectively, utilize HR systems to capture data more effectively, the likes of Workday, for example. So take it away from the sort of, I've got a spreadsheet on my desktop, and actually put that data somewhere where it can be meaningfully utilized. Now, obviously, getting HR data in one place is fantastic, and it really starts you on the journey. The issue is obviously that, that data is enriched further by having a much more a much more global view of the data across an organization. So not just combining HR data with other HR data, but taking data from, financial performance, looking at, cost data, looking at, some of the elements that exist across the organization that can be brought together with HR data to give a much more rich picture of the information that exists in a much more rich picture of the patterns that exist within the organization. And I guess the other thing really is, how does HR help in this process for the firm as a whole is by adding their requirements into the overall mix, right? What is HR trying to do with data? It's no good just doing data for data's sake. We've seen, certainly I can talk to 1,000,001 use cases where we've seen clients across our client set who spend a huge amount of money on data, and then will, corral all this data together. And then when it comes to actually getting the value out of it, they have no real story to tell. I think what's important is getting HR's input into the data that they're going to utilize, really get HR to drive the business use case, and then, make that, and some of them are showing there, we want to improve employee experiences, okay, we want to provide analytical decision support. I mean, it's quite weird because actually I was reading the FT yesterday, and there's an article that has been published by a very well-known organizational development head who has basically said that boards should really be utilizing data from across their organization, not just financial data, but data around absenteeism, looking at data around, the number of whistleblower complaints, and all these sort of data sets that currently don't exist in the world where, executives sit, are being encouraged to be utilized to help build the organization from the ground up. So, I mean, I think this insight piece is becoming extremely valuable, and if possible, I will try and share that article with everyone so that they can, they can take a look at that. I think it talks very much to what we're discussing here today. Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next slide here. Now, I've been in the digital space for a very long time, for at least the last sort of 10, 15 years, looking at how firms go from, having no data analytics at all to having, very advanced data analytics. And I've seen, firms across this entire journey. Now, really, there's a number of steps that, are typical to a successful delivery of HR analytics in particular, but also in data analytics more specifically. So the challenge is always, the first one we always get to face off, and the one I try and encourage clients to actually consider first of all, is to say, what are we trying to solve for? What are we really looking to do here? Because, as I said before, that a number of firms have spent an awful lot of money getting data, looking at big data, spending, and it's possible to do so in larger firms, spending, tens of millions of pounds on getting data together, without really saying to themselves, well, what are we going to do with this data? So I think the first stage in any of these sort of exercises is to say, what are we going to do? What is the use of this data? How is it going to be combined with other data sets to actually give value or insight to the business, or, improve efficiency in the overall HR processes that we run? And then once you've kind of defined that problem statement, what you then do is say, okay, well, do we have the data to support this? I mean, do we have all the information available either within HR, across the organization, and really spend some time looking at what data catalog you have? Do we have the attributes that we need to have? Do we have the ability to pull those together? Now, that is a key exercise, but I think the next stage is really where a lot of the firms we deal with are currently in their journey. And even from the HR and from the HR side, but also on the financial services side of our practice, the ability to actually source data, load it, and normalize this data is a crucial step, because that really is where you say, okay, I know where this data is now, and what I really want to do is get that data together so I can start to draw out the patterns and construct the analytic logic I want to build. And that step is really, this is where the use of agile tooling, for example, that can, powerful analytics engines that can pull data from anywhere, that can basically bring that data together in one place in a clean, normalized, and aligned form, really is where you start to see the acceleration, because theoretically you then have data sets that are meaningful. You can start to drill into, actually look at what they're telling you, understand how that data is actually interacting with each other, look for patterns, look for statistical things that exist between different data sets. And then you can utilize that in a very agile way to construct repeatable logic that allows you to then start to build the outcomes of your problem, the answers to your problem statement, and then to start testing that hypothesis and making sure that what the data is telling you solves the question you were asking in the first place. There may be cases where it doesn't, in which case you go back to your problem statement and refine that. But again, it's that constant, it's the ability to get that data clean, normalized, and in the same place very, very quickly that starts to move you down that journey much more effectively. And then once you kind of have that together, now, data for data's sake is boring as hell, right? No one wants to look at a spreadsheet full of data. where we're seeing increasing levels of power from data is where you start to visualize that. So it's the whole storytelling element using, business intelligence tools that, there are many of them out there in the market that basically allow you to say, okay, this is what this data is actually telling me. This is how you can drill in and understand what factors are moving, the particular outcome. And that allows stakeholders to get really, really engaged. And it's, the whole process of gamification, which is really turning analytics into something more of a game, so the mindset that people apply to it is much more sort of, enticing rather than just looking at boring data on a spreadsheet or in a database or whatever it is. And once you've kind of gone through this entire journey, the next step is obviously the productionization of this to make this a repeatable process, so that you develop a time series view of data so you can spot patterns and trends as they evolve. And you understand what the cause of those problems are, and start to really provide the insight that you need to around that. Sorry, I realise I just rattled through that. So if anyone has any questions, please pop them on chat, and we'll be happy to answer them at the end. But if not, then we'll skip to the next slide. Helen, do you want to run us through the digitisation maturity model?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, I can now. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think we're back on. So let's crack on. Can you see the digitisation maturity model in front?
I can. Yes. Sorry. Technologies and data is great when it works. Hey.
Yeah, absolutely.
So apologies, everyone. So the HR maturity model. So as you'll see on your screens, we've created an HR maturity model at Silver Cloud. So this has been developed to help us work with our clients and HR directors to actually try and show them where they need to be on the journey. Like I said before, sometimes they don't know what digitisation means. So hopefully by putting it in a visual form, it makes it a lot more easy to visualise where they need to get to. So the first stage is immature. So this is where data is really patchy and inconsistent, and HR teams that tend to be very reactive. So they're probably managing HR data on the spreadsheets, and they don't have much self-service in place. And this is really common with smaller companies, and sometimes with teams that only have a couple of people in their HR team, often because they struggle to get investment to invest in technology. But that said, there are some really good systems out there for smaller companies, so there should be no excuse these days. So that's the immature stage. The next step up from that is conceptual. So this is where the business has recognised the need to improve the offering from HR. So the people data might not be perfect, but they're working towards it, and they understand the importance of it, and they're starting to look at their internal processes. So a basic core HR system is usually in place at this point, and they can start to get some company-wide reporting. They're no longer spending a week trying to pull a headcount report together, which I know a lot of you will be doing. And employees are starting to manage their own data through self-service. And data is a lot more secure as well. So the next stage, this is where it starts to get really interesting. So this is defined. So HR is really starting to show its worth here, and following on from what Peter was saying, they're really starting to own and understand the people data, and then other parts of the business are starting to ask for it. So the right systems are normally in place at this point, and the majority of processes are automated. And because of this, the employee experience generally of HR is much more improved. So at this stage, we'd tend to see some digital reporting dashboards in place that are showing HR data, but are starting to show some data from other departments and showing the benefits of some cross-departmental reporting. So the next stage is integrated, and I know this is the bit where Peter gets excited and thinks it's really important. So this is where you've got a lot of data from lots of different departments, and it's all starting to be pulled together to show some real insight to the business and to really help drive business decisions. That's what you want it for. So at this point, HR is seen as a true business partner. And I know in the HR world, we've been talking about this for a long time, how we need to be adding value and strategic and be a business partner to the business. But without having this data and this integrated data, it's really hard to do that. And off the back of this, the HR service is a lot more seamless because of all this data and all this process and everything streamlined. The employees' experiences are much better as well. And then the final stage, this is what we're all aiming for, is predictive. So this is where all the HR departments need to be aiming for, particularly in the age of data and artificial intelligence. We need to be getting to this point. And this is where the business doesn't just have access to great data insights, but they're actually starting to be predictive, and they're starting to identify trends that are happening to the business, within the business, and then the business leaders can start putting in places to either change what's happening or to embrace it or do something different. And this is where you're going to get some real business transformation. So at this stage, HR is most definitely going to be on the board. They're going to be looking at ways to embrace new technology. So they've got all the main systems in place. They're now going to be looking at artificial intelligence and robotic process automation, RPA, and they've really had some investment in their technology. So this is our model, and hopefully all of you can see roughly where you fit into this, and it might help you to plan what you need to do for the future. And obviously on the top of all this is the skills that you need to do it, and I know we'll cover that a little bit later. But we'll be running a poll at the end just to see where you think you might fit, which will be interesting to see.
Okay, great. So, I mean, as Helen just showed, I mean, you know, the HR analytics journey is a long road for many organizations, and I think, you know, what I want to sort of focus on here is, you know, it's all good and well talking about this, but, you know, pragmatically, how do we go from where we are now forward and deliver the value and the insight that we need to? And this is more from an operational point of view. How does this actually work? And as I touched upon earlier, I think the key thing is to select the business case that you want to address first, right? And in theory, you know, my experience of this is that don't be overly optimistic with this, right? Try and be realistic about what you want to deliver within what time frame and at what cost. I think, you know, my experience of this is that the people who start this journey and go for the sort of small wins at a, you know, multiple small wins in a very short period of time and build that momentum both with their own confidence in terms of their own internal functions ability, but also the support and you know, general feeling across the businesses that they service to actually, you know, when HR says they're going to deliver an analytics piece, they deliver it on time and on budget. Because that level of confidence then, you know, allows people to then free up more capital to invest in this, and that, you know, that sort of you know, that happy cycle exists and allows people to then, you know, start to really move along that spectrum that Helen just showed on her slide deck there. It's also important to be realistic around, you know, your mixture of internal and external support, right? In a number of cases, you know, the ability to pull in data expertise to align with your HR experience and expertise is a crucial stage, because I think a lot of these processes have to be delivered, you know, with giving it just to HR to deliver this is not going to give you, giving this to IT to deliver the solution is not going to work, because fundamentally they don't understand or cannot contextualize the data sets you're working with. They tend to have very sort of rigid ways of working and aren't particularly flexible in the way they think about how data can be utilized. But at the same time, you know, allowing, you know, most HR teams, certainly that we've worked with, although the move is definitely in this direction, don't necessarily have their own internal sort of IT expertise either. And so what, you know, seems to work very well is defining that sort of model where you have internal talent who really understand the data and the insight available from that data, and then external support that can then help them deliver in a very flexible way as quickly as possible. The idea is then, obviously, you know, you've got a business case in mind, you prioritize the various business cases. There might be, you know, multiple that you're aiming at, but focus on one is deliverable, get the project team in place, and then really start to you know, to do that iterative development, make it quick, make it happen very, very quickly, use the data effectively, and start to play that message back to the business, get that confidence that you can deliver. And then, as I say, that cycle becomes a lot easier to go through. That budget security, you know, that sponsorship from the organisation as a whole becomes a lot more easy to gain once you start to show, you know, very, very quick wins. Right, I'm going to jump to the next slide.
Peter, just a quick question before you carry on. So, how long do these processes normally take? Are we talking a long time here to get these things up and running?
I mean, I think realistically, you know, the whole from no HR analytics to, you know, predictive analytics is a relatively long journey. But, you know, and depending on the organizational structure, these things will vary. But, you know, what we find is that a lot of this movement can start to happen within sort of days or weeks, really. If you get the capability, if you get the raw data or identify where the data is, you can really start to pull that, using some of the tools that exist out there in the market, you can start to pull this data together, start to observe patterns, start to sort of see some insights very, very quickly. This isn't the old world where, you would define to an IT team a multi-year program that they're going to execute for you. The idea is that you're doing this in, manageable chunks very, very quickly and very powerfully to allow that to happen fast. And that's really the way that we see, working with clients. It's very much that mindset that we're trying to sort of install in our client space. People aren't patient anymore, and budgets aren't there anymore to allow people to take, multi-year engagements and do these things. Really, what you want to start doing is getting short, quick wins into your sort of, all the ticks in the box, and then everyone starts to be very, very happy with what starts coming out of the HR function.
Okay, thank you.
So this slide here really is, again, I think I touched upon most of these points previously. Assessing the internal capability, understanding where you have technology, where you don't, where you need to, build technology solutions. It's also a sort of cultural shift as well, to getting people to understand and to be, people tend to be quite afraid of data. People who aren't, from typically an IT background, who may have specializations in policy or whatever else, tend to be a little bit nervous about data. And so culturally, it's a case of getting people comfortable as well, rather not just from a sort of pragmatic delivery point of view, but from a cultural element as well. Again, at the bottom here, we've sort of drawn out all the elements that kind of exist to be able to make data delivery and a part of the organization. And really, it starts again at the business acumen, right? The data is nothing without someone being able to derive the insight from it, right? So the idea that you can set IT teams off, running off into the distance with your HR data, and they're going to come back and solve all your problems is madness, because they're likely to focus on the wrong problem. Once you've got that business acumen, though, you know what data you need to get, and you always need to get as good a data as you can, because if you have poor quality data, the likelihood is it's junk in, junk out, really. So you could perform analytics, but the outcome of that data will not necessarily give you the insight because the data itself is incorrect. Defining your analytical model and tools. What we tend to see work best is as an experimental process, right? Very agile, very flexible. You play with the data. You try different combinations in defining your perfect model, or providing multiple models that give a sort of a distribution of outcomes that then you can assess and sort of determine which is the most valuable. That really prevents you defining a set of analysis that may be misleading or misguiding you in terms of incorrect assumptions around the data. These are kind of the development stages, right? Those are the very early development stages. I think what's really, really powerful, and where a lot of HR analytics functions we've seen do this right are very good, is by actually visualizing this data, right? We all know that executives across the organization have extremely limited time spans, or sort of, are unable to focus on things for more than 5 minutes. So the more engaging you can make your data, the more interesting the story that you're telling is, and the more visual it is, the more you hold people's attention. So, if you develop boring and confusing output in an Excel spreadsheet, no one's going to give you 2 minutes. Whereas actually, if you visualize the data, and there are so many tools out there now that allow that to happen, you can really make data come alive for the user and for the stakeholders across the organization. And then really it's a case of saying, well, now that we have this information, now that we have this, deep insight that has been given to us by, firstly defining the use case, getting the good data, building the correct model, visualizing it, what are we going to do with it? Right? How does it inform how we change our business or how we advance our business? And that really needs to feed into discussions with stakeholders. This is very much the point where, you as an HR function become fully integrated in discussions around how the organization shapes itself for the future. And this is all driven by the data that's there. So this isn't just sort of, gut feel, which has been probably something HR has been guilty of for a long time, relying on sort of gut feel and no qualitative rather than quantitative information. This is really giving you the quantitative information to become part of the story that change management really needs. And, assuming you can get all those things in place, I'm not saying that's easy, but, that is where you're going to get your maximum impact from the process.
Yeah. And I think for HR teams, the skills are a real issue for them. That, often when we go into companies, the person that can run a spreadsheet is the person that has to do all the reporting and data, but obviously data analytics goes a lot further than being able to run an Excel spreadsheet. So as an industry, we need to be really looking at how we're going to develop the skills within our HR teams to be able to interpret this data and to be able to work with it, most certainly.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with that, Helen. I think, I'm gonna sound like a bit of a stuck record at this point, because I think I've already touched upon this multiple times, but where, as a sort of warning to people embarking on this journey, because I know a number of people have sort of gone somewhere along this, the biggest problem that we see with clients is that they write a huge check expecting the outcome, in a long time frame. They say, right, we're going to put a big level of investment in this, and we're going to throw a lot of money at the problem. And, you've got the business then waiting for outcomes that, if you don't deliver, all credibility is lost, right? And in reality, I think the far safer model, and the model we always advocate with clients, is be very clear that you're aiming to win, get quick wins, right? HR data doesn't tend to be the largest volume data sets you'll see in the world, right? So there's no need to invest heavily in infrastructure, right? The more you can do with the less investment, the better this looks for everybody. And I think, it's again selecting particular development that happens very, very quickly. Okay, 1 week, let's get all our length of service data out of the system, and let's visualize that in a Tableau dashboard. Great. That probably take a day or two to develop, right? But once you start showing that to people, you can add additional facets. They're going to come to you and say, can we see that versus, pay grades? Can we see that versus absenteeism data? Can we combine that data with, I've got this finance data that shows the revenue generated by these particular employees. Can I overlay that? And that conversation, that evolution is what really starts to win people over and starts to give you that credibility and that ability to go forward. If you go from the other end of the spectrum where you're saying, right, I need £10 million to put this system in, and this system is going to cost, this, and it's going to take 5 years to deliver, and at the end it'll be all singing, all dancing. To be honest, the likelihood of that delivering and not disappointing the investor is very low. And so, I think you've got to try and find the right balance between, getting the quick wins on board and getting people engaged. And that really is where we see this as being the most effective way of doing things.
Absolutely. Okay. I think as well, from our point of view, when we go into companies, it's the same. So we often start with a company who's implementing new software, and it's the same journey. Once they've got software up and running and some of the processes are automated, the rest of the business starts asking for more. So it's the same with data, isn't it? You need that resource ready to take on those requests, but it's the quick wins that, if you just get a few processes automated, then you can just build on that once you've proved that it's working. So absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, and I think also, the clients that you've obviously described to me in the past who are looking to migrate from their existing infrastructure into into more established HR analytics systems or HR data repositories, even that can utilize data analytics to get that data from its current raw form into those systems much more effectively, in a cleaner way, in a more managed way. And that automatically improves the outcomes from that system itself, right? If you can have the best all singing or dancing HR system in the world, if the data going into it is incorrect, then it might as well not exist. If it takes you a year to migrate even the most basic sets of data into your HR system, then in theory that's just lost time and investment. So even at that stage of the process, right, there is an awful lot of tooling and analytics support out there that can be leveraged to actually get you to where you need to be. So it's not just let's get everything perfect in our data, because that could be a very long journey. Let's in fact utilize analytics from day one to help us advance our use of data across the firm. whether that be to the migration into the system or whether it be post that migration into delivering outcome from it.
Agreed. Okay, thank you. That's good. Okay, shall we go on to our final poll? So as I mentioned earlier, just a bit about you and your organisation. So the question is, where is your organisation currently in its HR digitisation journey? So we currently rely heavily on paper-based processes and spreadsheets. Begun reviewing HR processes with a view to moving online. All main HR processes are managed through technology. All our processes streamlined and fully integrated across departments. HR processes are predictive, automated, and help to support wider decision making. Not expecting many to reach the last one. I'll just give you a minute to answer those. So I would expect to see people answering around the second or the third point. That's normally where people still seem to be. I think there's still a struggle to get the right investment for the right technology to be fully integrated. But certainly HR teams are aware that they need to be doing it now. Okay. Let's see. Give you one more minute. Okay, let's see what everyone said. Okay, yeah, similar. All at the beginning of the journey.
Yeah, and that's very much what we're seeing as well for a number of our clients, is that that's exactly the stage they're at as well. So that's consistent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so we've got time for some question and answers, if anyone has any. So I've taken a couple down as we've been along. So if anyone has anything else they want to ask, we've got plenty of time to do. Put in the chat box your question. So one of the questions, Peter, what technology solutions are available out there to support companies on their HR analytics journeys?
There are a number of data analytics tools that now, and seem to be more every day really, that are coming onto the market that allow you to, source data from anywhere, bring it together, normalize it, and basically start to construct logic within the tool itself. Again, they're all focused on flexibility. That we utilize a number with our clients, so things like Data 360 Analyze. There's Alteryx. There's something called Pentaho, which are all, again, they all have pluses and minus things depending on what you're looking to do, but their ethos is very similar. It's source data from anywhere and allow very agile development of logic within the tools themselves. In addition to that, we often utilize visualization tools. Again, there are so many out there now that it's a very crowded space. But the ones we come across most frequently are things like ClickView. There's a solution called Tableau, and of course the Microsoft version Power BI. So there are multiple combinations of systems that are used. I guess obviously these can work in parallel with your existing, HR systems. So, I guess which again, a little bit of a question back to you, Helen. What are you seeing as the most sort of heavily utilized repository for HR data now? Which ones seem to be leading the charge on that front?
Yeah, well, it's funny actually, because when we help a company choose an HR system, we have to go in and do requirements gathering, and the HR team will be telling us that they've got no data, they've got no systems in place to pull data together. But when you do requirements gathering from outside of the HR team, they're often using Power BI or Tableau with other data sets, but HR just aren't aware of it, and they're not pushing the data into it. So they're actually sometimes already in existence, but it's just not part of the HR journey. But I mean, there's a vast number of different HR software vendors on the market now, so it's much harder actually for companies to choose, because it's easier to develop software now because it's all cloud-based, and it really depends on your company size. So you've still got the top three, which are Workday, SAP, and Oracle, but there's a lot of tier 2 and smaller systems now on the market that, the main thing is that you can integrate in and out of it. That's the main feature. As long as you can do that, you can future-proof it and pull your data out. But yeah, there doesn't seem to be one leading one at the moment.
Okay, that's interesting.
Okay, another question. Is it worth looking at HR analytics as a service? So I know sometimes we get asked if we can provide like the HRIS support for a company because they don't have a role internally to do that. Is it something that could be done with HR analytics?
Yeah, I mean, it's something
we've
been in discussion with a number of clients around. The advantages are that, you know, you're outsourcing your analytics capability to people who are highly experienced in the space. So, and also utilizing technologies that you may then have, you know, if you had to do this in-house, you'd have to, you know, pay for the technology itself, develop your internal expertise, and, you know, manage that process. But, you know, as we've seen, you know, HR has been one of the you know, fastest adopter of cloud-based platforms in the world. So, you know, again, you've got a sort of, you know, HR data provisioning as a service is now a very common model. So the expansion of that into HR analytics as a service is almost a logical step for many firms. Obviously, I think the advantage is that, you know, with all these things, there's probably not a one-size-fits-all. So there is always going to be some bespoking required. But again, I think, you know, having experienced analytics people to help you shape your data, to inform, you know, to manage the process for you and to play you back the results, you know, it makes sense for many firms because they simply don't have the budget or bandwidth to manage these types of things. But, you know, they do have the budget to develop repeatable processes that can be managed as a service. So I think yeah, it is a rich vein for many people. I think a lot of people are now so comfortable with the use of cloud-based technologies in the HR space that, you know, the expansion of that into HR analytics as a service is a logical step for many.
Yeah, it'd be interesting what happens. Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
That's good. Yeah. Okay, that's all the questions that we have. So thank you very much, everyone who sent those in. Just all to say now is thank you for attending. Apologies for the technical issues earlier, but here are our contact details if you have any questions once you come off the webinar. And like I said, we'll send around the slides and a recording of the webinar, and then hopefully, Peter, you can send that article you were talking about that you were reading yesterday, which might also be useful.
Yeah,
but yeah, so, brilliant. So thank you to everyone for joining. Have a good day.
Yes, have a lovely day, the rest of you. Bye-bye.